July 7th bombings, a quarter of them who said that they thought the bombings were a good idea. That isn't a wake-up call to the effects of political Islam in Britain?
I mean, let's dispute, and that particular survey, I think, was non-representative. If you look at other surveys who have talked about, including in Britain, about engagement...
So whether you dispute the survey or not, you don't think thousands of Muslims in Britain supported the July 7th bombings?
No, I do not think so. There are issues of extremism in Britain. There are extremism across the world. But that is why it's not about political Islam. It's not about people who are inspired by that. They're terrorists, and let's face it, let's call them that. Let's reject that. Let's say, absolutely, we don't support that. But that is not what political Islam, that's not is what it's all about.
Okay, Sarah Joseph, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to throw it now open to the audience. This House believes that political Islam is a threat to the West. Lady in the second row.
I'm Mona Al-Tahawi. I'm from Egypt, but I live in the US, and I'm a proud former speaker on the debates. Thank you, Tim, and thank you for the panel. And my question is to Shadi and Sarah. Sarah, you spoke very passionately, and I admire your passion, but I'm passionately against everything you said. And my main question to you is, what if the oppressor is political Islam? How can I, as a Muslim woman, then fight that oppression? And for Shadi, you gave several examples of what you think is the way the Muslim Brotherhood has changed. And I have interviewed the Supreme Guide of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Deputy Supreme Guide of the Muslim Brotherhood, and I'm in touch with several young Muslim brothers who blog. And you mentioned Ibrahim al-Hudaybi wrote an op-ed in the Jewish Forward. He wrote it in response to an op-ed that I wrote, saying that as an Egyptian, liberal, secular Muslim, I support everybody's right to take part in politics, but I don't think the Muslim Brotherhood supports my right to take part in politics. That's why Ibrahim responded. And you said that the Muslim Brotherhood has opened up and has met all the democratic values. Well, they wouldn't allow me to be president of Egypt as a woman. They wouldn't allow a Christian Egyptian to be president of Egypt because they're Christians. So that goes to your point about minority rights.
Please.
So how can you defend them and say that they've modernized and changed when on all your indicators they have failed? The Muslim Brotherhood has not changed. On the surface perhaps, but essentially they are the same, and I consider them a threat to everyone.
Shadi Hamid.
Okay, well, I'm not here to defend the Brotherhood. I said that. However, I went through the key indicators where the Brotherhood has changed over time. Let's focus on women's rights now. If you compare the Brotherhood discourse 20 years ago to the present day, there is a difference where there are Brotherhood parliamentary candidates who are women in both Egypt and Jordan. Just a second. Where in the Majlis al-Shura of the Islamic Action Front in Jordan, in the beginning, there were no women present on that body. Now there are women in that body. I'm not saying that they have accepted what I would consider to be the necessary standard for respecting the full rights of women. But in their specific context, they have begun to make changes in that direction. I'll give you an example. And first of all, if you
briefly, because I wanted to come back for a moment.
They're not going to deny your right to participate, because here's a 2007 program for the Islamic Action Front in Jordan, and they say they're interested in quote unquote using the legislative process to increase the rights of women, and they support the right of women to have a job, the right to education, and the right to choose her husband.
Okay.
Granted, that's not enough, but that's a positive step.
Let me just ask Mona Al-Tahawi to come back on that briefly, please.
In Jordan, it's the Islamist party that has consistently stood against a woman's right to file for divorce. In Kuwait, it was the Islamists who consistently fought against women's right to vote and run for office. And you mentioned within the Brotherhood itself, the democratic values you claim that they now espouse. Young bloggers who criticize the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood are told to choose. Stop blogging or leave the Muslim Brotherhood. Where is the democratic value in that?
Okay, Sarah Joseph.
You asked me, and I know you completely disagree with me, Mona, so that's fine, but you asked me simply what would I do if I disagreed with politicalism. At the end of the day, as Muslims, the Quran said be just, for justice is the closest thing to God consciousness. Be just, even if it be against yourself. So we have to be against ourselves, and that's fine. But we also have to recognize when things people are doing good works as well. And the Riaya program, the welfare program that goes on, that, I mean, at the end of the day, I hear what you're saying about many things about the Muslim Brotherhood, but at the end of the day, when it was the massive earthquake, who was there first? Who are the welfare programs? Who's putting into action what they truly believe?
I just want to bring Majid Nawaz here.
Thank you, Tim. Let's look at Hamas as an example again of a Brotherhood offshoot in Palestine. Aside from their resistance, look at their policies. Just before Israel invaded Gaza, Hamas had instituted a penal code where they said they would stone to death adulterers, they would lash people that drink, and they would chop off hands. On top of that, Zahar made a statement statement whereby he legitimized the killing of every single Jewish child in the world. This is the threat we're talking about. We're not saying that there aren't moderates and that there aren't extremists. What I'm saying is that the ideology of political Islam gave birth to jihadism. And finally, I'm glad, Sarah, you agree that Muslims must engage in politics. That's not what we're saying. What we're disputing here is politicizing Islam. That's a different thing. We are engaged in politics.
People are being driven by their faith,
Joseph, then we're going to take another question.
People have been driven by their faith, motivated by their faith to go into politics. But you give some...
Like me. And like Yahya.
No, but it's more than that. And for example, the AKP, and it's more substantive than that when it actually comes down to the ground of actually creating government. It has to be more substantive than, you know, just chatting to ministers. It's got to be...
Can I just clarify what you said here? Yeah. I object to a lot of things that the Brotherhood says about women. Like I said, they aren't liberals. However, that doesn't make them a threat to the West.
Okay, all right. We're going to take a question from the gentleman in the fifth row there. You, sir.
Okay, thank you. My name is Adil from Eritrea. I mean, it seems that...
From where, sorry?
Eritrea. Both of the opposition and proposition, they are against extremism, and we are all against extremism. But can you please explain for me what is the threat of political Islam? I mean, you mentioned that the participation of the woman in the, the parliament or something like that. What is the threat in that to the West? Thank you.
Okay, so those who believe that a woman is not human enough to be able to lead a state have dehumanized a woman. Those who believe that a non-Muslim is not human enough to lead a state have dehumanized a non-Muslim. That philosophy, present in Islamism from its beginning in the 20s, created the jihadist organizations around the world. The Muslim Brotherhood member, Abdullah Azzam, was Osama bin Laden's teacher in Afghanistan. Sayyid Qutb, the Muslim Brotherhood member, his brother, Muhammad Qutb, was Osama bin Laden's other teacher in Saudi Arabia. All jihadist organizations emanated from Islamist parties. The assassins of Sadat, who I spent time with in prison in Egypt, their teacher was Salim Rahal, a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, a non-violent political Islamist organization. My point is, when you dehumanize the other and say they're not human enough to lead the state because they're not Muslims, you divide people along sectarian lines.
It would really be a mistake to conflate Al-Qaeda and terrorist groups with the Muslim Brotherhood. In fact, one of the fiercest opponents of Al-Qaeda is the Muslim Brotherhood. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the second in command, actually wrote a whole book accusing the Brotherhood of betraying the Islamic cause. He's even quoted as saying that the Brotherhood has lured thousands of young Muslim men into lines for elections instead of onto the lines of jihad. So Zawahiri is against the Brotherhood because they participate in the democratic process. And also, Mark Lynch has made the argument that where the Brotherhood is strong, Al-Qaeda has failed to gain a foothold. Because the Brotherhood is able to channel the frustrations of young Muslims into practical politics instead of towards violence.
Does it mean that we have to have them instead of true Islam, instead of all the rights that all Muslims respectful of inner pluralism and spirituality should leave to the risk of this threat? Because you're making the nuance between the extremist terrorist and the Muslim Brotherhood, who is just a political party, and that has no spiritual legitimacy.
I share many of your concerns, Imam Yahya, but that doesn't make them a threat to the West. People have the right to be illiberal.
Okay, we're going to have a question from a gentleman in the second row. Yusuf.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Al-Murad Qasim. I'm from Kyrgyzstan, which is in Central Asia. I have a question to the two gentlemen in favor of the fact that political Islam is a threat to West. Now, if you believe that political Islam, which conveys actually a lot of good messages. For example, Muhammad ﷺ was the biggest politician Muslim, I believe, because Jews and Christians and whoever lived in peace under his rule, right? That is political Islam, and we cannot deny that Muhammad ﷺ was a good politician in this regard. Now, if you believe that political Islam is a threat to the West, what do you suggest?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, so we don't mix up matters, Muslims engaging in politics is absolutely a necessity. It's not a threat, it's not a problem. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a civil leader. as demonstrated by the Sahifat al-Madinah he signed, whereby he gave everyone equal rights. He engaged in politics as a human being without a religious agenda. He treated everybody equally. That's not what we're talking about. What we're trying to highlight is those who come to politics with an ideological agenda that happens to be called political Islam in this debate. I call it Islamism. What is the threat from Islamism? When you say that somebody cannot become president of a head of state because they're not Muslim, you're not recognizing he is equal to you. And that begins a process of dehumanization, which can end up in violence. And there's a threat there. And that's played out in the streets of the UK. In the 90s, when I joined Hizb ut-Tahrir, there was no terrorism. There was a very rapid growth of Islamist parties that were not violent. From those Islamist parties, it's a matter of history, terrorist parties emerged. They share the same philosophy. Yes, the Brotherhood criticize.
So you helped create terrorism?